Namaskar. Welcome to this session. We are discussing Ahimsa. And to discuss Ahimsa, we are considering himsa. Because Ahimsa is to refrain from himsa, and therefore we need to analyze and scan the natural tendency of himsa. So, we were at a point where we should be understanding how himsa happens and why himsa happens and of what intensity the himsa happens. So if we have to be overcoming it, we'll have to consider these factors. Because the measures for mild himsa and measures for intense himsa would be different. And why himsa happens is also an important aspect to be overcoming any commitment of himsa. And the mode of himsa is also matter to be investigated to really overcome. So that's why we were seeing the sutra of Patanjali, which mentions krutakarita anumodita lobha krodha moha purvaka mrudu madhya adhimatra. So these are the factors. And of course, dukkha jnana anantya phala. The consequence of himsa is also untowards, and therefore that also would help us to overcome our tendency for himsa. So that's a marvelous piece of sutra that we come across in Patanjali's text. So one of the factors, all the three factors are important to be considered, but namely why himsa happens, in what mode the himsa happens, and with what intensity himsa happens. So we were discussing that aspect of intensity. We need to overcome himsa tendency by taking recourse to this particular factor in analysis. Now, intense most himsa is that where one assaults one's own offspring, one's own close ones, loved ones, one's parents, one's children. So this would be himsa with greatest brutality potential. Unless the brutality potential is high, you will not be indulging in committing himsa of this nature, that is killing one's own kith and kin, one's own siblings, one's own parents, one's own children. So this is the himsa of highest intensity. Then if the brutality is little less, if the krauriam it is little less, then it would be aptasvakiya, our own relatives. Then when the brutality is further less, it would be brutality against one's own friends, one's own companions, one's own associates, one's own friends. So that's called sneha himsa. So mata pita putra himsa is highest, apta swakiya himsa is little in less intensity, and then sneha himsa, that is killing one's own friends. When the himsa potential is further less, then one indulges in assaulting, vexing, troubling, or even killing those who are not our relatives. We are not related to them, they are not related to us. Unknown people. Then there is further less when the himsa is only happening with regards to one's aliens, one's enemies, one's foes. Then if the himsa potential is further less, then it is upakari prani himsa. It is killing or vexing and tormenting that life or those lives which are upakari, which are benign to us, which are helpful to us, such as our own cattle, etc. So they are the animals under whom we have obligations. We are favored by those animals. So killing the favorable animals and birds. Then next is killing sadharana prani. That animal is not really upakari. It is not really our benefactor. We don't get any advantage, nor do we get any disadvantage. Such kind of animals' life killed. So that is called sadharana prani himsa. Then apakari prani himsa. Apakari. Those who are our aliens, who are our tormentors. So these are not our enemies, but these are animals which are harmful to us, such as mosquitoes, bugs, etc. So they are called apakari prani himsa. Then further less, then upakari vanaspati himsa. So the life form comes to vanaspati. Life form comes to botanical life. So before this we were considering animal life, now we are considering botanical life. So botanical life, which is upakari, that means it is benign, it is useful, we are under its obligations. So that is called upakari vanaspati himsa. Then sadharana vanaspati himsa. The vanaspati, the vegetable world or botanical world, which is neither useful nor useless. That is a general category of botanical life. Then apakari vanaspati, the poisonous plants, destroying poisonous plants. Then yakshya vanaspati himsa. So the botanical life, which is not phenomenal for us, it is subtle. And then the further it is adrushya prani himsa, microscopic life. And then himsa nivrutti. And then we will be able to be refraining ourselves from himsa. So this is what is a mention by a mystic poet. He describes how to really wean ourselves from himsa tendency. It should start from our highest degree of himsa. And it has been showed in the description above as to which is the highest brutality potential to lowest brutality potential. So we should come from we should commence from lower end for himsa nivrutti. In the sense, we will have to commence from the intensified brutality, himsa, that we must control. And then we will be able to cross over the himsa barrier. So this is how there is a wonderful kind of discussion about himsa tendency. Anyway, himsa is dvesha bhava. So we must be aware of this, that all himsa commences, gets triggered because of dvesha bhava in our minds. Dvesha bhava means aversion. So if we have aversion for something, the himsa potential is already getting seeded in our consciousness. And therefore we must take care to see that the dvesha bhava kind of himsa, which is not actualizing, but then it is himsa potential. And then if it is neglected, then it can get blown up and we can end up being great brutes if we do not really take care of dvesha bhava. So the wise man's advice is that we must become aware of, and we must be having a prick of conscience with dvesha bhava that is within us, that we have aversion for something and someone, that we need to overcome. Otherwise we will not be able to really handle this monstrous tendency of himsa. And of course we need to identify what is our degree of brutality. And whatever is our highest degree of brutality in us, we must be aware of it. So, what is suggested is that we must take a rationalistic view of himsa tendency and try to manage that basic tendency within us. Anyway, I would like to draw your attention to the ahimsa that is mentioned or has got mentioned in Bhagavad Gita and perhaps the Gita Shastra. In the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which is called Kshetra Kshetrajna Vibhaga Yoga. Now this is the chapter which is for all seekers in Adhyatma, Paramartha, spirituality. That's a wonderful chapter that every seeker of Adhyatma, Paramartha, Yoga, spirituality must be closely taking a look at. And it is said that for Jnana Prapti, that is for spiritual wisdom, the greatest foe is himsa tendency. In our worldly knowledge, we don't bother about our tendency, but we can be still earning our knowledge. For knowledge, there is no connectivity between himsa tendency and a thwart to knowledge process. You need to be intelligent, you get knowledge. It doesn't really matter even if you are cruel. So cruelty doesn't really stand as in counterposition of knowledge. But himsa is quite in counterposition of jnanam. And I think you should be aware of difference between knowledge and jnanam, because we have repeatedly dealt with this aspect. So ahimsa is qualifier for jnanam. There is no point in going for pursuit in spiritual wisdom without considering the management of himsa tendency to be important. We must do something for himsa tendency, otherwise we don't get even entry into that realm of spiritual wisdom. So that is what the 13th chapter tells us in Bhagavad Gita. And the 13th chapter mentions a set of qualities which are important for Jnana Prapti. And therein, Ahimsa has got mentioned. So this Jnanam, Adhyatma Jnanam, Paramartha Jnanam is also called Viveka in philosophical system. And Ahimsa is also a limb or a component there. Now, this has a great emphasis in 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which I suggest everyone will take a look at. Anyway, now going to another scriptural statement that we get is in Bhavishya Puranam. Veda Vedanga Tattvagno Gita Shastra Parayana. This is how Patanjali has got mentioned in Bhavishya Puranam. And Patanjali is predicated with certain qualities here. So the Bhavishya Puranam says that Patanjali is Veda Vedanga Tattvagno Gita Shastra Parayana. He is well versed in Vedangas, Vedas and Vedangas, and also Gita Shastra Parayana. So Bhavishya Puran tells us that Patanjali was a great emulator of Gita, Bhagavad Gita values and the values which come in Vedangas. And therefore Patanjali has right to advise on Ahimsa. Because usually we put a question, are you qualified to give advices? So if this question is put, whether Patanjali, who is going to advise on Ahimsa, Satyasteya, Brahmacharya, Parigraha, etc., is there any qualification? So this is a testimony here that Bhavishya Purana tells us that Patanjali was incarnation of the qualities mentioned in Bhagavad Gita for a noble person. So Vedanga Tattvagno Gita Shastra Parayana was Patanjali, and therefore he has that qualification. That's why he is mentioning he has that adhikara, and therefore he has completely inculcated, digested, assimilated the principle of Ahimsa, and therefore his advice has unique value. Anyway, as we were looking at Bhagavad Gita's Ahimsa mention, when the word Ahimsa comes in 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, let's see what the commentators are telling us. What is Ahimsa? Adi Shankaracharya, Bhagavad Pada Srimad Adi Shankaracharya says, Ahimsanam praninam apidanam, not to torment and vex any life. Ahimsanam praninam apidanam. So we will be able to get some understanding as to what Ahimsa principle is. Then the followers of Srimad Vallabhacharya have this to say, Ahimsa parapida rahityam. One should be free from any tendency, any act, any commitment to parapida. So one should not be a party to be vexing someone. Then Srimad Ramanujacharya, he says, which is more important here, in the light of what we discussed earlier, Vang manakkayahi parapida rahitvam. So not to be vexing, tormenting someone in one's own body, mind and speech. So many times we speak ill about so many people, or we think about ill of so many people, although we may not do something on the cognitive plane. On the motor plane we may not be committing to such acts, but certainly we indulge in vachik karma and manasik karma. So to be freeing oneself from himsa tendency in vak, kaya, manas. Now we can understand how there is that adhyatmic touch, because adhyatma always stresses on threefold karma, kaya, vacha, manasa. And Ramanujacharya clearly says that the himsa should not be traced in any act which is committed by kaya, vacha, manasa, by body, mind, speech. Then another commentary on Bhagavad Gita called Tatparya Chandrika, it also includes the kaya, vacha, manas components. Manakkaya is tribirabi ashastriya pidayam api himsatvat. So not to do anything according to injunctions, it is himsa. Nothing to be done either by body, mind or speech. Now we come to discuss the Gita Gyaneshwari. Gyaneshwar Maharaj, a saint from Maharashtra who flourished in 13th century, wrote a marvelous commentary on Bhagavad Gita called Gyaneshwari. And in the 13th chapter, he takes up discussion of Ahimsa, which is really outstanding. So 13th chapter, his OVs, his couplets from 218 to 338. So nearly 120 OVs are dedicated to Ahimsa. So see how he is discussing Ahimsa with great details, knowing that it is a formidable foe and the most important to overcome for spiritual process. So I will just give you a brief resume of his passage. He says Ahimsa is of many types. Since himsa is of many types, anana vidha, aneka vidha. So himsa and ahimsa both are aneka vidha. So he in his flowery language tries to explain us this principle of ahimsa and the tendency of himsa. See, otherwise in dynamics of our life, what we do is we cut the trees in our compound and try to build up a fence. Cutting the tree and then trying to raise up a fencing to the compound. So there is himsa in that. Although you say, I am doing to protect my property, I am raising a fence, a fencing for my property, it is by cutting the trees in your own compound that you are trying to raise up the structure of fencing. So sometimes this is how it happens in our life. In our dynamics of life, we don't really cognize what kind of adharma we are committing, what kind of himsa we are committing. Or in order to protect the tree, cutting the branches from same tree and building a fencing for the tree so that the tree would be safe. Now what have we done? We have cut the branches of the same tree and then we have raised up a fencing for the tree. So also, we commit in our dynamics of life of which we are unaware. When we are hungry, we try to cut our own limbs and eat those, cook those and eat those and quench our hunger. Or demolishing a temple and building a compound from the same material to that property. So also he points out, because in his time the yagna was quite rampant, the yagna practice, and yagna practice had assumed different dimensions, and the real essence was lost, and yagna was performed for material purpose and material gain. And in yagna there would be some kind of himsa. And by performing himsa, one was trying to score merit. So he pointed out that there is himsa in such kind of sacrifices and home havanam, where you are committing himsa and trying to score merit. So this is how the yagna had gotten place in the culture, and this was long time back. So it's a historical fact that yagna was practiced without understanding the essence of it. And the karma kanda, which was a dark part of our history, did really have such time when karma was, or karmanusthana took place, yajnanusthana took place that way. And that's why he has pointed that out. Because one is in a very religious practice, but little intelligence would divulge the himsa tendency rampant in such acts. Even today such acts happen. You rob somebody and then you quench your hunger. You rob someone and you quench your hunger. And Yagna had assumed such proportions that it was happening in medieval periods. So he points out that which was then in vogue in the society of his times, the 12th and 13th century of our era. And then would be eating the food which is totally infested by himsa tendency. So he is quite critical about all that. Then he says, in his flowery language, it is like robbing a very rich, affluent person and then donating that wealth so that one scores merit as a great philanthropist. So robbing, committing burglary in a very rich man's house, collecting all that wealth and then making a charity of it. This is what some people do it. And little insightful reading of the life today, we will come across such people that they rob someone and make charity out of it and get the recognition as a noble person. Proceeding further, in Gyaneshwar, he mentions an important facet of Ahimsa. So he says, he draws our attention to a cat. The cat which pounces on a mouse or a rat and then kills it. In the same mouth, it holds its kitten and goes from place to place. What's the difference between the jaw of a cat, jaw opened for vanquishing a rat, and jaw opened to protect the kitten? The difference is that in opening the jaw and mouth for kitten, there is mamatvam, there is maya, there is love for its kitten. And therefore, in that same mouth, it grips its kitten. So, the ahimsa should happen that way. The cat holding the kitten in the mouth rather than the cat holding a rat in the mouth. And for himsa tendency to be drying away and ahimsa tendency blooming and blossoming, one needs to understand the importance of maitri bhava, karuna bhava, mamata, maya, prema. So you must develop these emotions in you, otherwise you will not be able to overcome the himsa tendency. So friendliness, compassion, mamata, sense of belonging, maya, that kind of affection, love and affection, and the prema bhava. We need to develop these tendencies or these qualities in our mind and not bothering to develop these qualities, trying to take up ahimsa is something ridiculous. So he points out that we must develop these qualities in the mind. Then the mind and senses would behave conducively, otherwise they really work with himsa tendency rampant in it. So the ahimsa must be in antakaranam more than in our motor system. And we think that this ahimsa principle in normative sciences is something moral ethical practice. Ahimsa is said to be key to conduct and universal harmony, and ahimsa sums up the moral code of a moralist. Violence is law of brute. It starts with blind fury and ends in retaliation. Evil is sterile and self-destructive. It maintains itself by the implication of good that it contains. Evil is never overcome by evil, but it ceases only through goodness and the self-purification. And self-purification gets motivated by sufferings of woes. The suffering of woes should not be with fretting and fuming in the mind. One should be forgetting the wrongs of others. If you don't forget the wrongs of others, you will never be able to practice. So it is only through self-suffering that we wean ourselves from all wickedness. Non-violence is not a passive kind of countering evil or harmlessness, but it is positive resistance to evil in which the self ranges itself against wickedness. In non-violence, we are not supposed to hate evildoer, but resist the evil only. By doing good to such a person, we redeem him from and efface the evil itself. It is important to understand the brute is more in man than in jungle. As long as man is dominated by raga dvesha, the so-called humanitarianism and service out of humanitarianism is more harmful than being honest. So, this is how the wise words are there, or wisdom words or words of the wise people are there to tell us about this himsa and ahimsa. Now it is worthwhile to take cognizance of very important concept that Sanatana Dharma gave, identifying the himsa that is so unavoidable. In our mechanics of life and dynamics of life, the himsa is really inevitable. And therefore, now when the inevitable cannot be overcome, some measures have to be taken. And this was realized by the wisdom of the sages, wisdom of the Lord. And then it said that when you cannot be preventing that at all, some measures need to be taken. So in our conduct of life and dynamics of life, some himsa aspects are absolutely inevitable. You can't really avoid. then what will you do? Although you are helpless, hapless and hopeless, something needs to be done even in such case. And there is a wonderful concept of Pancha Maha Yagna. So the Pancha Maha Yagnas were mentioned to really a form of atonement or expiation from certain himsa which is absolutely inevitable. See, in our life, conduct of life, we walk on streets. Have you ever taken cognizance that how many tiny creatures might be crushed under our footwear? Now, we look ahead and walk. We don't look what is coming under our footwear. So we will be killing so many tiny creatures under our feet. Unaware, with reflexes, we will be killing so many animals, so many tiny creatures rather. So when we are eating food, we are committing himsa. You should recall that this was considered earlier. When we consume water, we commit himsa. When we breathe, we commit himsa. So when we are in our natural life, even carried out on very normative tracks, yet himsa is inevitable because of the principle jivo jivasya jivanam. The life is sustained by life. Life is sustained by consuming life. Some form of the life must be consumed for us to be living. And therefore, we have seen this inevitability in himsa, and therefore the Vedikas proposed a concept of Pancha Maha Yagna. And you should recall that we were repeatedly telling you about Yagna Dana Tapas, principle to be practiced. Along with that wonderful foundation, Yagna Dana Tapas, Satsanga, Sadhana Sangha, Shastra Sangha, and Satvik Ahar Vihar Achar Vichar. So this was repeatedly sounded in course of our discussion on yoga. So we are now going to consider this marvelous concept of Pancha Maha Yagna. The Yagna principle is so important to be inculcated. And now let's see, in the light of Ahimsa sadhana, Ahimsa practices, how Pancha Maha Yagnas come in. But this will be in our next session. So enough for the time being. Namaskar all of you.